listening to Connections Radio, the sound of business. I'm Louisa, Wizzi, Magnussen with Dan Cottrell on the business of podcasting. Founder and podcast-in-chief of the Podcast Guys, Dan Cottrell produces audio and video content for clients with purpose. His team of experts handles the entire end-to-end production process from ideation and storyboarding through to recording, editing, distribution, and marketing. Dan joins me today to discuss the business of podcasting. Welcome, Dan, and thank you for joining me on Connections Radio today.
Hi, Louisa.
Hi, how are you?
Very good. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Very good. Could you please start by outlining how you first got into podcasting?
Well, I've had an unusual route into the business of podcasting, but it has been a hobby of mine since, as long as I can remember, really. I've always had this fascination with audio. I remember, being a young schoolboy, still at school, recording hits from the radio, jingles from the radio, and then playing those back as if it was my own radio show.
On cassette tape, right?
On cassette tape,
Yeah,
exactly.
old school.
There will be listeners to this program that don't know what that means, but I'm sure there are lots that can relate to what I just said there. But that was obviously, where my first passion for audio came. I used to love the way DJs like yourself used to introduce tracks and stuff like that. But it wasn't until 2007 that I got myself a microphone and started my own podcast back then. So way before it was fashionable, of course, in 2007. Technology wasn't as it is today. So if I listen back to any of those productions, I cringe at the production quality, having just done it on a very old USB mic into a very old 2007 laptop. But it was really good fun. I did a show for 2 years as a hobby, really, and built the listenership up both in the UK and in the US. Most of my listeners come from the US, but this was all alongside building a corporate career, basically, that I was in. So I was in the corporate world, obviously ever since I left school, really. And then it was only when the pandemic happened back in 2020 that it kind of forced me to reevaluate where things were. And I thought this is the ideal time to combine the hobby with the business and start the Podcast Guys, essentially, where brands, organizations, businesses, any organization that still have messages to put out there but couldn't do it through the traditional methods like events, conferences, face-to-face meetings, still needed to communicate those messages. And I thought, well, the best way to do that is through a podcast, and here we are helping them do that.
Fantastic. So what can podcasting do for a brand or personality that wants to get a message out there?
Well, I think it's absolutely to give them a tone of voice, a window to the world that's more authentic. Having long form conversations, as you know, right, can help you get to know someone, the personality of certainly the presenter, but also the people behind brands that they obviously have as their spokespeople generally. So what it does is it builds a community of loyal listeners that are obviously very engaged in what you're saying, that will probably resonate and relate with the content that you're putting out there. And over time, that builds a really loyal and engaged following that, of course, hopefully gets your brand in a position to then becoming familiar with when the time comes that they might want to engage, for buying purposes, so that's the beauty of it.
I want to talk about authenticity and scripting and planning, and how important is it to know what you want to say and what your message is before you start podcasting, or is just being an authentic human more important than scripting?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you can tell, right? You can tell if something is scripted. It definitely doesn't sound authentic, and you tend to lose the listener. And it's like when you just hear people, reading the words out loud from a book, right? It's less engaging. You switch off, your mind wanders elsewhere. But if you've got a narrator of a book that really brings to life the words that they're reading on the page, and puts their own style and their own unique accent on the page, or whatever it is, it really draws you in and makes you as a listener engage much better. I think one of the things that we do as a production company working with brands is we try and open up the doors of creativity to them. So of course they need to work within a specific structure and a specific format of the podcast that we've developed for them. But they should be able to bring in their own anecdotes. They should be able to bring in, they shouldn't be afraid to go off on tangents if they want to, because we can, worst case is, it's not very good and we just deal with it in the edit, right? That's the beauty of a podcast.
The
It's not,
beauty of
it's
post-production,
yeah,
and non-live audio, yeah.
exactly. And I'm sure I'm going to make a few mistakes in this interview, and then, hopefully you'll be able to cut those out as well. But that is the beauty. So I think having a really strong structured start, for example, like you did in your intro there, you could see that was really well thought out and was setting up the interview success. And then everything in the middle, really, although you've got your points that you absolutely need to hit and you're really well informed in terms of the research on the points that you want to get across, then everything else should be allowed to ad lib, really.
It's reminding me of like marketing now, because marketing, they say you need to have a face, you need to have a human in your images, in your videos, in your everything, to draw human to human, right? We like that human connection. It's the same with audio, and authenticity is so important. I remember I had a co-host once when I was working, before I went professional, I was volunteering for a community radio station. I had a co-host who was an actor, and he was very much a trained actor. And when he started on the radio, he was acting. And I sat him down and just said, look, just drop it, because you are in people's bathrooms while they're having a shower. You're on their radio, you're in people's cars. It's a very intimate space, and people want to hear a real person behind the mic. They don't want to hear a sales pitch, do they? So, I mean, for mine, I do a little bit of scripting. I script a little intro, I script some questions, but as I've already done, I'm completely ignoring the questions and we're just having a lovely chat, which I think works better. What do you think?
Definitely. And remember, audio is much more intimate than video, right? So you're absolutely in the ears of these people that you're talking to today. It doesn't get, much closer than that, really. And you're right, you're in people's bathrooms, you're in people's bedrooms, you're, in people's cars with them traveling to work. You're in the ears of people. So, being able to connect with somebody via audio is such a magical thing. And of course, you're not competing, right? In a very cluttered, busy world of marketing, you're not competing generally with other forms of media. So you can't, watch a TV program whilst you're listening to a podcast, right? You just can't. It's not physically possible. You can't.
I mean, you can attempt to, but none of it will go in, will it?
Exactly. So, you've got this time, this unique time that you can spend with your audience, giving them really interesting information that they will relate to and resonate with, over a 20 to 40-minute window, if not longer. And you've got their undivided attention uniquely than any other form of media there is.
And how do you relax your guests, your clients? They've perhaps approached you, they want to start a podcast, they've got somebody coming forward to be the host or be the guest, or what do you say to them about how to make it compelling, but also how to be themselves? How do you relax those people? Because people get nervous about audio, don't they?
Yeah, so reminding them it's a podcast is a good thing, and reminding them it's not live, as we just said, and the magic being totally in the edit. So I think, what I always say to people is, look, be natural, be yourself, if and relax, because if you get, halfway down a sentence and you think, actually, I've missed something big out there.
I'm talking Cottrell.
Yeah, I wish I had said that. Feel free just to stop, pause, and let's start again. Let's just do that bit again, and we'll deal with it in the edit. It's absolutely fine. And the other thing is environment, right? So, we work with many different corporate organizations that always think, they start off thinking, oh, we need to obviously go and, rent a studio. We need to be on location, in a BBC style studio. And I remind them and say, that's not actually the case, because, in our experience, most of the time, when you put somebody that's not used to broadcasting in a specific studio, podcast studio, radio studio, whatever it is, they get the lights, the cameras, the microphones in front of them. It's impossible to forget that they're there, right? So they clam up, they're like deers in headlights, and they're like, oh, okay. And it becomes quite unnatural. They need over preparing. Whereas all of the kit that the podcast guys have and the kit that we take on location is all modular. We've got kits for any type of scenario, and we can transform any space really into a studio, and you wouldn't know any different. But if you're in the office, let's say, of one of your clients, it's a very natural space to the speaker generally, and so they'll almost immediately forget there's cameras watching them, there's lights, there's microphones in front of them, and because they're in their natural habitat, their normal environment, and they'll relax. And that's how we do it. And of course, bringing the biscuits and the donuts to the recording always helps as well.
But make sure they're not chewing while they're on the mic.
Yeah, exactly. That doesn't make for great audio.
No, I have to ask you about for those that are just listening, the video aspect of this radio show that we're producing today. There's the podcast guys pink taxi behind Dan Cottrell right now. Now, is this I want to ask, is this a mobile recording studio? Because if it is, I'm very excited.
It absolutely is. Yes, it
fantastic.
Absolutely is. So that is the Podcab. So it is a trademarked name, the Podcab. And as you'll have probably noticed, and if anyone's been on our website, thepodcastguys.co.uk, you'll see that our brand is very pink. So we're a very pink brand, and the cab certainly encapsulates that. It's white and pink essentially. So we've got half the taxi white, half the taxi pink. But it was one of the first things that I did when I started the business, and it was as all of the best ideas start, which was over a gin and tonic around a friend's house, thinking about ways that I could, take this service to market, essentially innovative ways to take the service to market. And I just came up with this idea of, what about if I went out and just bought a black cab, a traditional London black cab, and just turned the back into a recording studio, essentially. And there was silence across the room. And I'm used to having lots and lots of ideas, right? I have loads and loads of ideas all the time. And most of my friends, say, yeah, all right, Dan, all right. And including my wife. My wife hates all my ideas, essentially. But everyone was like, actually, that's not a bad idea. And my wife was the same. She was nodding her head. This was
I bet you couldn't believe it. These people that are always dragging your ideas, they like it. I've struck gold.
I couldn't believe it. So, and to that point, though, this was a Saturday evening. I don't need much encouragement, because by Monday afternoon, I'd bought a cab, right? I bought this taxi, and I bought this cab for £1,500. The paint job, the wrap that it's in, it costs more than the actual cab. And and it's been with me. It's been with me ever since. And I drive it every day. It's my company car. I drive it wherever I go. So if you see this, pink Podcast Guys branded taxi coming towards you, wherever you are, then feel free to flag me down. But you have to get in the back and record something. That's the only catch.
That's fantastic. I want to get nerdy now and ask you what equipment you've got, what mics you've got, how have you treated the room, but we won't go that far because the listeners might not be as interested in exactly what type of equipment you have as I am. But we'll talk off air.
Definitely. Yeah.
In such a saturated market, how do you get your clients' podcasts heard?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think the key here is to not think of B2B podcasts, business podcasts that we tend to work on, as being like any other entertainment type podcast out there. So we're not generally competing for space in the Apple charts. We're not competing for space in Spotify. We are competing for a niche audience in most cases, where a brand wants to attract a certain type of listener. So we spend a lot of time in that onboarding phase, developing the strategy of the podcast, really understanding, why the purpose of why this brand is wanting to do a podcast. And it can't just be because the CEO said we'd like to, right? And that happens a lot, right? The CEO said we have to start podcasts, that's why we're doing it. It has to go beyond that. There has to be a purpose. There has to be an understanding of who that listener is, and also what we want the listener to do once they've listened to the podcast. That's really
so
important.
Like a call to action type thing. So you've got to give them value, and then you want them to do something in return, right?
Yeah, exactly. And of course, not everyone is going to be interested in the type of content that a brand might put out. We do have some brands where it is, entertainment podcast, and it's their name, it's their brand that's all over it, and it's a, B2C type audience. So you might want to get mass appeal. But 80% of the work we do is working with that niche audience. We spend a lot of time developing that, and then once we come up with the original idea, the podcast series, what it's all going to, sound like, the topics we're going to cover, where we're recording from, or logistics. We also then have to be building a strategy and a plan of how we're going to get that podcast into the intended ears, of the audience that brand wants to get. And so it works in parallel, and it works from day one. And most people, when they think about marketing a podcast, think of it as kind of the last thing to do. It's kind of like an afterthought, really. It absolutely shouldn't be. It needs to be developed from the outset. And that's why people come to us, is because it's that kind of 360 approach, where we're going to make you an original podcast, but then we're also going to give you a plan that we can execute, or you can execute it with your marketing team. We're going to give you a plan of how you can get this podcast into the ears of the intended audience. And that's, ultimately the goal.
You're listening to Connections Radio, the sound of business. I'm Louisa Wizzi Magnussen with Dan Cottrell on the business of podcasting. We're going to take a quick musical interlude before we get back to business. So this is the break. Are you happy?
I'm more than happy. I'm ecstatic.
Ecstatic. Wonderful. Well, we'll go straight into the next half.
Okay, great.
You're listening to Connections Radio, the sound of business. I'm Louisa Wizzi Magnussen with Dan Cottrell on the business of podcasting. Dan, what do you think about the rise in video podcasts? As you can see, we're filming today's, and we'll release the audio first, and then we'll release the video. It's kind of a new thing for me. But do you think it's worth filming podcasts and uploading them to platforms like YouTube on top of airing audio only?
Absolutely. I mean, I always say, why wouldn't you, really? I think that the reason why particularly brands choose to start a podcast is because it forms part of the overall marketing channel, right? And marketing is all about having, assets that you can use to communicate those messages. Now, of course, the podcast gives you a brilliant asset in the sense of these long form conversations, these 30-40 minute conversations that you have, as we've already talked about. But why could what's wrong with then filming that and putting it out as YouTube and having it as a full length video version? Because actually some people prefer to watch than they do to listen. Now, granted, in the B2B market, not everybody is literally riveted to the screen and actually watching a 40-minute business podcast. So that it's not, but it's not necessarily about that. It's about the short little snippets, the snackable content that you can get from filming the video. And that's what we see works exceptionally well. So these 30, 60, 90-second clips of really, pivotal points within a podcast, clipping those up, subtitling them, publishing those on social media. That's where you get the engagement. That's where you get people to become aware of your podcast, the relevant audience, aware of your podcast. And that's what's, gonna improve the chances of somebody clicking through and listening to the full length content, usually the audio version, essentially. But so important to film it if you can.
But what about the editing? Now, I used to have to polish everything, like really into my polishing of products before they get aired, But now I'm trying to get used to this more authentic way of doing it and just chuck up the raw audio file. And it's quite liberating, actually. But what do you think about that? How much editing is needed to make it a compelling sort of video version? Or do you think people should just top tail it, intro it, outro it, stick a bit of podcast music at the beginning, something like that, and stick it up raw for everyone to see?
I mean, I am a big advocate of editing, because for everything that we said earlier, I think the magic is truly in the edit. And I think also when we talk about business podcasts as well, and making people feel comfortable, like we've just done, like, when you say that, so it takes the pressure off. And particularly in the B2B world, people do make mistakes because they're not doing this every day, right? They're not filming podcasts every day, they're not recording podcasts. They're going to make mistakes. So editing for us is a process. It's a really important part of the creative process. And often we're going beyond just having that two-way conversation and question answer. Certainly from a video perspective, often when we have businesses coming on to describe quite complicated things, or they just need to bring to life what they're saying or what they're explaining. You can do that with visuals, so you can bring in kind of b-roll footage, or you can bring in schematics, and if somebody is watching on YouTube, then it can overlay, the podcast almost becomes the voiceover and the narrative to what's being shown on the screen. So I think that works exceptionally well. But I'm aware that many podcasts now are saying, like, let's just put it up, let's just put up a raw conversation, unfiltered, uncensored, and away you go. It's just not the style that we do, and I don't think it would be expected from our clients either, because they pay for that full service, including the edit, and they want it to be as professional as possible, really.
I was going to make that distinction. I mean, you're coming from a place where you do this for a living and you're being paid to do this, whereas if you're only being paid for audio, are you going to bother editing the video for just a few more hits on YouTube? I don't know if you are.
Yeah.
But I like what you're saying. It makes me feel better about wanting to edit and edit and edit.
Yeah, but you can go too far, right? And I'm sure we've all heard this, where people, it's such a surgical edit that you can almost hear.
Like cutting out every and every R and every pause, and you've got AI and stuff that can do that for you now, apparently. And I don't like it. I won't go near AI audio editing. I think, no,
good.
I've been doing this for years. I'm better than somebody who's coded a machine to take out the ums. I do it by sight anyway, so I know what an I'm sure you do as well. I know what an looks like. It looks like a little lump. So you can go through and be like, right, let's get rid of half of those. But I wouldn't do it with AI. Do you use any AI tools in your work?
So only to speed up really laborious transactional type, workflows within the business, essentially. So, from a publishing perspective, or from how we kind of operate our workflow and assign tasks and all that kind of stuff, then but I'm really clear with everyone within the business that AI will never ever replace creativity, and it shouldn't. So I think I come from the school of thought right now that smart people can see straight through AI, right? If you read anything online, you can tell if it's been AI written, because they use the same kind
There's
of
no style. Well, there is a style, but it's very, very recognizable.
100%. 100%. They
Yeah.
use the same kind of anecdotes, the same kind of wording. It's, smart people are seeing straight through it. And even the algorithms are seeing straight through it now. Google's seeing straight through it. It's, of course it's going to get better over time, but it can't replace creativity. And people come to us and pay us for our creativity. And I'm sure there are people that would think, oh, we could just be lazy and use AI. That's not us, and we wouldn't keep our reputation if we went down that route, that lazy creative route.
How much is successful podcasting about effective production techniques, and how much is solely down to the personality and persona of the podcast presenter? Who owns it?
Yeah.
Technical skill or persona?
I think you gotta have the right balance. I mean, the persona and the presenter is hugely important. I mean, that's the person that is gonna keep, make or break your listener, isn't it, really? I mean, if somebody might tune into this show for the first time, and then absolutely just warm to you, they understand your kind of your background, you share with them just enough so they feel like they know you, and they're going to stay with you for a long time, right? If somebody tunes into this podcast and they just cannot relate to you, they can't, they don't like the topics of conversation, they don't like how you present, they're not going to. And I think it's the same with a podcast. So personality, I think, is everything, but having the right personality for the audience that you're trying to attract. So there is, as you may be able to tell, and anyone listens to this, I am quite an upbeat, enthusiastic person. I find it really, really difficult to tone that down, right? So it would be really difficult. It would be so difficult for me to front a very serious podcast, because it's not my style. I wouldn't enjoy that, and it wouldn't resonate. Like, if we had really serious financial service listeners, essentially, they're probably not going to listen to me because they'll think this guy just, I'm not relatable, can't understand what he's saying. I don't understand why he's so excited about finance. But like, but there are other people that can speak that language, that holds themselves really well, that has the gravitas and the substance behind them to resonate with that intended audience. So getting the presenter right is absolutely important, but then having the really good team behind you to structure the episode, to bring in the right kind of call them features, if you like, or segments of the podcast, in at the right time, or even like splice things together. So you might record something totally out of sequence. You might record something, or they might make a point at the end of the podcast recording. You'll have the foresight, the production editing foresight, to bring that to the front, because that's going to hook people in for faster. So I think you've got to have a good mix, but you've got to have the charisma and the personality of the right host for the right audience.
Do you ever run into trouble with this, with clients that are going, we want this person to be the host, and you kind of talk to them and you think, this person doesn't have enough energy, or doesn't have, do you then media train that person, or do you have to go back to the client and say, actually, we think you'd be better at this? How do you handle that? Is that a challenge?
So brands are quite are quite happy for us to lead on this. So they will often have recommendations to people that they would like us to to talk to and kind of vet, if you like, to see whether they would be suitable for their podcast. But so it's rare that they ever just force somebody upon us, and we have been known before to do like a Company's Got Talent-ish type thing, where we'll do some auditions with people and then make our recommendations back to the business. Often they're all very good. Yeah, it's good, and often they're all very good. But we have to choose the one that's maybe done some of the most prep work, or again thinking about who they want to listen to the podcast, who we think, based on our experience, the audience is going to resonate with the most. So we do that occasionally. And sometimes we're asked to bring in an external host, so they won't often have anyone within their organization as the spokesperson on the podcast. They want somebody perhaps more well known, or they want somebody from within the industry that's kind of celebrated within the industry. So they want us to go out and find them and prep them, and that can be done as well. But yeah, I think we do a lot of consultation work is done in the kind of onboarding process to find out who would be the best person to have. And then yes, we do have media training, so we do provide media training to any certainly new presenters as part of the onboarding as well.
Fantastic. Dan Cottrell, thank you for joining me on the business of podcasting. Where can we follow you online, listen to your work, and get in touch for services?
Well, thank you, Louisa. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. www.thepodcastguys.co.uk. That's thepodcastguys.co.uk. And you can find out more about us. You can meet the team there. You can see some of the video work that we've done. You can see our show reel, and you can see also some of the broad range of clients that we work with, including listening to some of their podcasts, which we've made for them. So, Louisa, thanks so much for your time.
No worries, Dan. Thank you, and have a lovely day.
Wonderful.
10-15 minute interview, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay.
Fantastic.
We're going to do one continuous recording. And can it sound like I'm coming through my mic?
It does.
Okay, lovely.
It does. And does mine sound like it?
Yeah, it sounds really good, actually.